Beautiful.
Okay, all right. So I'll just hit these buttons here. And we are live, I believe. So
Oh,
a very warm welcome to you, Ilse. It is a delight and a privilege to have you with us. Welcome.
thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this evening or this morning, whichever time zone for everyone where they are at.
Totally. And for those of you that don't yet know Ilse, Ilse is a business coach, a leadership coach. You work with hundreds of coaches and leaders around the world. You're a senior mentor for the Coaching Institute. You've helped me out a number of times in business mentorship. So we are absolutely thrilled to have you as we unpack this very interesting topic called the dark side of leadership.
Yeah.
And we want to really welcome your engagement on this conversation. For those of you that are tuning in with us, we'd love to know where you're from. If you have questions as we go through, by all means, jump in the conversation. I've got a little screen to my side here. I'll be keeping an eye on it and bringing in your thoughts to this conversation. Else, to get the ball started, what are the markers of the dark side of leadership? How do we identify darkness or the shadow in leadership?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I've just seen quite a few people say hello already. We've got Susan from London. Hello. Paolo from Italy. Hello. Hey, everyone. Um,
Hey.
it's kind of a good thing to look at also. Why do we want to look at the dark side of leadership? So I might just share a little bit on that first and foremost, because having a look at the markers of the dark side of leadership has to be done in context, because it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of pointing fingers, only looking for the bad stuff, getting on our bonnet, and as looking for bad things that go on without context. And so I think, you and I were sharing before, everything that we do, and my belief is as well, which is why I look at the dark side of leadership, is to understand how to move forward and to understand how to develop consciousness and to transform people. We've got to make sure that we're looking at all polarities. And the dark side of leadership is something I kind of fell into, and I've been working with leaders or been in business for the last 20 years or so. And leadership has always been something that's been very, very, very close to my heart because of the level of responsibility people have as leaders. Leaders are really guardians of the space in which they occupy. We are people who are service to others before we are service to selves. And so when we look at the dark side of leadership, as I fell into this, it was because I was noticing that there were so many challenges, so many saboteurs, so many cognitive barriers that my clients and my community was experiencing that was preventing them from being a functional, healthy, and ecological leader. It wasn't ever something that I kind of set out to do. And it's what I do my research on now. So I'm doing my postgraduate work on looking at the dark side of leadership, because there was so many challenges that people were having. And I was just like, well, looking at the good side, the transformational side, the empowering side of leadership, we're doing a good job of that. But why are we not helping people, and why are we not moving forward in becoming more ecological leaders? And
What do you mean by ecological when you say ecological?
Yeah, no, good question. So ecological being what is good for you, what is good for everybody else.
Got it.
Looking at the context of, in an organization, we would say it's the stakeholders within an organization. So is the decision that you're making good for you, or is it good for you and the employees and the shareholders and the janitor and the competitors and society? So does that make sense, John?
It certainly does. And I know we're getting some questions coming through. Do we want to take some of those questions now, or do you want to unpack this a bit more? How would
Let's
you
unpack it a bit more, and and I'll answer that very first question that you had, and
Okay,
then
beautiful.
we can start delving into it.
Got it. So Jay, we've seen your question. We acknowledge what you sent through. Thank you for that.
Beautiful.
We'll aim to circle back. So yeah, so how do we identify this dark side of leadership?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the dark side of leadership is essentially dysfunctional leadership. So dysfunctional leadership is any behavior, any conduct, any mindset that a leader has that causes harm or intends to cause harm to the ecology and the environment of which they are responsible to lead. So this is typically seen in, for example, people may have heard of narcissistic leadership. People may have heard of Machiavellian style leadership. Narcissistic leadership being where it's full self-interest. The ego dominates. All decisions are made for the interest of the leader, and there's very little, actually no concern that's given to other people. So you'll see behavioral markers such as making decisions that ensures that the profit motive is first and foremost achieved.
Yeah.
At the expense of taking care of people. We'll see,
Well, I just want to speak to that if we could. I know our community are definitely seeing a lot of that with agendas in the medical industry, such as we want to get this vaccine out, or we want to silence these other medical voices. And we learn through contrast. So what I'm hearing there contextually is an organization of leadership, a very powerful organization, has an agenda, and it's at the expense of contrasting voices, contrasting science, and really muffling or silencing the voices of a community is kind of how I'm linking into what you're sharing there.
Yeah. So absolutely, because when those decisions are made by big pharma and so forth, where does the money trail go? So if you follow the money, you can kind of understand why those decisions are made. So when you've got really highly narcissistic leaders, or you've got a narcissistic ethical climate, or you've got a narcissistic institution, then you can bet your bottom dollar that people's interests, other people's interests, other people's sense of dignity, other people's sense of humanity, other people's sense of justice and ethics are not going to be considered. And then we've got Machiavellian style leadership. So there's a range of different ones. I won't go into all of them. But Machiavellian style leadership is extremely harmful because with Machiavellian style leadership, the leader has some traits of narcissism, being highly egoic, but also they are typically known for manipulating and abusing the ethics and morals of those around them. Right. So they're very, 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 very deceptive, very sneaky, very cunning, and we've started to see more of these styles of leadership, and this might surprise or not surprise some people, but particularly in movements of leadership where we have transformational leadership, charismatic style leadership, all those leadership styles that is quite seductive, that is very intriguing, that is very celebrity-like. There's a whole body of work that I'm doing research on at the moment of the celebrity of leadership and how that really has infiltrated our sense of this sense of well-being that we expect to have when we are working with leaders, when we are associated with leaders, and we expect that they will be responsible for us. But the seductive nature of some of these new movements of leadership, within the entertainment industry, now we have, business leaders who are vying to be celebrity leaders now. It's not just enough that they're good at business. They want to be celebrity business owners. Right. That has really started to erode the moral fabric of what leadership really is supposed to be about. And that's where we start looking at all the markers and the morals around ethics.
Got it. So far, what I'm hearing is a lot of this is just so much glorification, expansion of the self, whether you call it celebrity, whether you call it just building up the self. And true leadership is pretty much the opposite of that. And how much? Yeah, right. Yeah. And so perhaps, do we want to explore what this opposite looks like? So we've got the dark, it's self, different mechanisms of charisma, control, whatnot, to bring life force or bring power or control to the self versus what's the opposite?
Well, there's, you know, responsibility would probably be one of the good markers of good leadership, you know, and it's so subjective. But when we look at it from my framework, which is my strength areas, looking at, well, the dark side of leadership and the ethics that's integrated with that. So if we take it from an ethics perspective, we look at, well, what is ethics? Well, ethics is ethical behavior that is the norms of which we expect people to relate to each other. So you would expect to have a certain level of respect with me, John, as a fellow human being. You would expect to have the freedom to voice your opinion and not to be muted, silenced, or censored. You would expect to have a sense of fairness when you're with me. You know, there's a whole range of other standard norms that we would say is quite ethical. Now, where do these ethics come from? That comes from our morals. So these moral fibers and ethics are very intertwined. So the ethical behavior is based on the moral principles, moral values. So if we look at it from that perspective, what is the opposite of the dark side of leadership? Well, the opposite, if we just purely go to contrast, it's where you are putting others above self. You are not putting profit motive above people.
So you're valuing humanity. You're valuing the essence of the being of the soul above these things.
Yes, yes. Because when we take it back to the true intention of leadership, and true is very subjective. So when I say true, I mean, well, what is the integrity of the office of leadership, regardless of what style of a leadership it is? Whether it's, you know, me being a parent to my children. As a parent, I'm assuming a role of leadership. Well, there's no written contract that we have saying, well, this is what I will do for you as a mother, and this is what I expect from you as a citizen of our home. Same thing within a workplace, same thing within the world. We're all citizens in some way, shape, or form within the organization of which we hold a place within, and therefore the responsibilities lie within each. However, there is a greater level of responsibility upon a leader, and that is because they have the balance of power tipped in their favor.
Got it. Now, I just want to speak to this. Michelle's has shared a comment here in relation to this. People don't want to take responsibility. It's easier to blame someone else. Now, what I'm interested in with your experience is you have a deep experience in psychology, human behavior, going beyond the masks, going beyond the facades. You know, what is required for a leader to want to take that responsibility and so avoid the blaming, as Michelle's pointed out? What's the attitude? What are they going to be willing to do to take on that responsibility? And let's maybe unpack that from a deeper lens of human behavior, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So it would be interesting to know what Michelle means by blaming someone else, just so we got more context around that, perhaps. But to answer your question in that, John, which was, what does a leader need to do to be willing to take on that level of responsibility? Well, I think it very first and foremost starts with what are the values that this leader has? What do we say that what do they care about? What do we care about? Because we all know that an organization will always move culturally and in a climate of the values of the leader, because modeling occurs. So to be willing to take responsibility means that you have to actually care about the office of leadership. You have to be someone who wants to build an organization, a home, a global community, a Facebook group, wherever you're creating leadership, one that is upholding really strong principles of fairness and respect and dignity and helping people grow and respecting each other, and, you know, all of those really true and pure values that we have. So it starts there first and foremost, but then it goes beyond that. You know, we can have great intentions. There was a saying I heard today. It was, just because we do good for the sake of serving our own interests doesn't mean that we're do-gooders. It simply means that we've got good at taking care of ourselves. And that's where the masks come in. A lot of the dark side of leadership is about the masks that people wear that they don't even know. So the whole how do we start taking
I'd
responsibility?
love to hear more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so taking responsibility comes with starting with an intention. And what type of leader do you want to be? I'm sure there's many people on here who are in, perhaps management roles. They're parents. They want to have a voice, have a leadership within the community. What type of leader do you want to be? And what does responsibility mean for you? That would be a good starting point.
Massive. And I know we've done some work together in facilitation and taking that journey. And I love, what I got to discover on that journey with your guidance was the power of facilitating, and great leadership for me and facilitation go hand in hand, and really valuing the voices, valuing the development of people, which is what I'm also seeing on the contrast is the dysfunctional leader, or the shadow, if you like. It's about glorification of self and protecting the mask, or believing that the Wakido, as the Native Americans refer to it, the shadowy kind of false self, versus facilitating true connection, facilitating true relationship and mastery beyond the masks. Could you maybe speak a little bit beyond this masks and facilitation leadership? Perhaps something along those lines would be
sure.
Amazing to hear some more about.
So we all come to the table with all of our cognitive biases, our cognitive barriers, and these aren't even known by us. The words we use, the phrasings we choose, the tonality we have, the intention we have. We're walking around often completely unconscious as to how we're presenting ourselves and how we relate to other people. So when we do this, what we're doing is we're choosing to stop being responsible for our interactions and our sense of self. And this affects us at an emotional level, a spiritual level, a psychological level, a behavioral level, social level, on all different frameworks. So what we know about the masks that we wear, and some people might know it as the imposter syndrome, is that based upon how we've been conditioned unconsciously and subconsciously, based upon our conditioning in our past, unless we've done the work, we will come into adulthood, into leadership, with these specific types of roles, masks, imposter syndromes that we wear. So it might be, you've become the hero, or you've become the victim, or you've become someone who's the rebel or the black sheep. So some of these masks come on board. Now, how this affects us when we're attempting to create change, particularly when we're in a leadership role, in a management role, when we're trying to create something really important for people and being responsible for people, is they can hold us back. They can create saboteurs for ourselves. It creates these mental blockages that we just don't have awareness of up until the point we start really doing the work on ourselves, and or we have greater levels of accountability. So people who can reflect back to us where we're going astray. People who can reflect back to us with pure honesty, knowing that there's not going to be any kickbacks. And even if there is, they can handle it and you can handle it, where they might start going off the rails a little bit. And it's something that we don't have enough of in all leadership roles, particularly in corporate leadership. Because there's more of a level of hubrism, which is, highly egoic style leadership. And this is, largely part and parcel because of the way in which we're educating people in the marketplace these days. It's a very high level of bottom line mentality. And so we're not really teaching people about, and teaching people in leadership spaces about how to really relate to other people, how to actually ensure that we are bringing that moral fiber and that moral fabric so people can have the freedom to speak, be able to not be silent when they see unethical misgivings and so forth occurring. And so those masks come along with us. Those syndromes come along with us. And it stunts us from being able to fulfill the true and integral role of what it means to be a leader.
I love that. What I love about what you just shared and linking it to some comments that are coming through, like hashtag save our children, fight the labels, labels box you in. You know, as we become more conscious leaders, as we become more aware of these masks as these Wakito, these blind spots, it's
Yeah,
almost like an atmosphere of perhaps, help me out here with the word, more awareness, more clarity, where the shadowy things
all that.
can't actually live because there's too much awareness. And even getting feedback from fellow coaches like yourself, leaders, leadership trainers like yourself, or people who are aware of this, you can see your own shadows faster as well, and you can move into a more functional role as a leadership. And that's that love of feedback and transparency and wanting to be exposed versus the leader that wants to just control and hide and keep things buried and go from there. So I really love what
Yeah,
you're saying, because I see this as awakening the whole world. This is because this leadership is all over the
it,
planet,
it
and the
really.
more conscious we become, the better it is.
And what we tend to see is that there are the very extremes of dysfunction occurring, you will see high levels of unethical behavior occurring. So,
Mm,
and those extremes is usually people who are so far on the scale of psychopathy, mental illness. It is on that high end of the dark side of leadership where these people need to be medicated because they actually just do not have cognitive function anymore. There's what's called moral disengagement. And it's one of the theories that we look at in looking at the dark side of leadership. Moral disengagement is where we have become so conditioned to doing immoral behaviors and engaging in a climate of unethical behaviors. It's just a darkness of cloud that you cannot even understand what morals are anymore. You do not have a
mm,
sense of justice. You don't have a sense of compassion. You will not have a sense of fairness, of ethics, of truth, of dignity, of being able, of free speech. None of that is even in someone's awareness when they're on that far end of the scale. Now, when you add to it modeling, which is a social conditioning strategy, you add to it modeling. Now you've got a climate of individuals who do not see the immoralities that they are perpetuating upon people, upon economies, upon finance, upon political systems, upon organizations. So it's a severe case of moral disengagement. And the reason
mm,
why it's so important that we look at this from a leader's perspective is because of the power imbalance that exists in a leader and subject, and I use that term lightly, but leader and subject relationship. And so
mm,
so power can be abused, misused, and manipulated. So it's really important that we
mm.
acknowledge that while we are all citizens of the organizational space that we're within, right? So John, right now, you and I, you know, we're here, we're speaking, we're sharing, we're teaching. So we're in a leadership position now. We have a responsibility to ensure that we are communicating not in a way that is intended to manipulate, harm, or move people into thinking a certain way or the other that's going to abdicate their ability to
Mm.
independently think, critically think, and look at another side. But
Yeah.
at the same time, everybody here on the group has a responsibility as well as citizens. However, because of the position
Yeah.
that leaders have, there's a power imbalance that's very difficult
Right.
for people to move through if they're
Well, I
engaging in.
just want to speak to that.
Yeah, go for it.
Just want to interject. There's a lot there. I mean, a comment came through also from Michelle. Will the shadow ever disappear? And it's a really, good question in the sense of, being a leader. You're mentioning we're here in a leadership role. We still have shadow. All leaders are having some degree of shadow. So it's that willingness to continue doing the work of introspection, of coaching, getting feedback, and wanting to continue that journey, not and the willingness to remove the masks.
Yeah, it really is. It's really well said. It's the willingness to do the journey, and it's and specifically what I'm really interested in looking at, part of the research that I'm doing is the expression that we have, our ability to communicate, our ability and our freedom to speak what is on our mind. Now, this doesn't mean that we start saying whatever we want on a Facebook chat, or if whatever we want on our Facebook post or on Twitter, and we start becoming, you know, social media terrorists. What it means is that with the shadow being in existence for every single one of us, it means that when we are engaging in situations where we might see some form of unethical behavior, or we notice our shadow is causing us, I'll use that word kind of lightly, but our shadow is helping us, enabling us to act poorly. What is going on for you? What is happening for that individual? Who do you have around you that can remind you of humility? Who do you have around you that can remind you of morals, of ethics, of values? Who do you have around you that's holding you to account? Because the journey can be done on your own, but goodness me, when we're talking about development and growth and conscious awareness, we can live in our own echo chamber if we don't allow ourselves to have people around us who's going to speak into our lives.
I love that. And leads me to the question, you know, as we're becoming more aware of the dark side of leadership, how does this help our own transformation? You know, okay, the masks are being exposed, we're getting that feedback. You know, how else is this useful for those listening in to go, okay, you know, am I willing to step more into this leadership role, have these masks removed? You know, how does this help?
Okay, so what tends to happen, and we're noticing more and more work on this, more research, more studies done on this over the last probably the last 10 years or so, is that where we've got dysfunctional leadership, we have what's called moral muteness or moral censorship. So moral censorship is very common when you're engaged in institutions or systemic environments where there is dysfunction occurring, you know, from the level of leadership. So moral censorship is where they'll create an environment where people don't have the freedom to speak up naturally. So if we see something occurring here with you and I, for example, John, if you and I here, if something strange happens, something unethical happens, something immoral happens, we have a climate here where you go, you know what, hey, Ilse, that wasn't cool.
Yeah.
You know, it's just we have a climate of openness, transparency, and we've got that relationship where I'm not going to get my feelings hurt. I'm going to accept that from you. But where there is dysfunctional leadership, they can control the way in which people see what ethics and morals are, and they can twist it to ensure that people don't see morals, and in fact, they disengage from morals to allow leaders, institutions, organizations to continue operating in moral disengaged behaviors. Then we have moral silence. So moral silence is when an individual chooses to disempower themselves and not speak up in the space of dysfunctional leadership. Now, this is where it's really important that we recognize that there's multiple reasons why some people don't speak up, because we all still have a choice. We always have a choice to express ourselves and to morally express ourselves when you see an injustice occurring, or to express yourself when you see human dignity being stripped away from someone, or you might be experiencing it yourself, or where you see that there's not procedural fairness occurring, when there might be a challenge, a grievance, a problem, or whatever it might be. We can choose to disempower or empower ourselves. And the empowerment of moral expression is directly linked to our psychological well-being. It's directly linked to how we feel about ourselves emotionally as well, and it's linked to our spiritual well-being. The studies are completely consistent when we look at how does our moral expression contribute to our sense of self. Well, it's very difficult when you now start operating within frameworks of dysfunction, because people will do one of four things typically. They'll either acquiesce their moral expression, and this is usually because they just don't see that there's a point speaking up about it. They may have seen someone else try and express themselves and they've been shut down, or they don't feel as though their voice is going to be heard, or they think it's just one person. What can my voice do? So they'll acquiesce. That's one version of moral.
And I think that's I hear David Icke use that word a lot, and this is where a lot of these laws and things have been passed by a lot of acquiescing of our rights, our liberties, even freedom of speech, the gross silencing of different medical voices. So I think this is definitely a huge one. This
it is.
First point.
Yeah, it really is, and this is kind of where the rubber really hits the road, and where my interest lies in why do we acquiesce? And it's not, and we don't actually just acquiesce our silence, because my framework is always looking at, well, why aren't we speaking up? Why do we sometimes allow other people to take away our power? What goes on there? So the second form of silence is quiescence. And this is actually one of the more common forms of moral silence. Quiescence is when we fear that there will be retaliation because we've spoken up.
Yeah.
Right? And that is what we've seen more of lately. So people won't speak up because they'll fear their reputation, they'll fear death, they'll fear being injured, they'll fear their psychology, they'll fear stress, they'll fear their emotional well-being if they speak up, they'll fear their social standing if they speak up. So that's the quiescent component of moral silence.
And that's a very common one there. I mean, I've noticed that in myself. When this thing started, I said, well, am I going to start speaking up around some of these topics because it's going to impact my brand as a coach, as a trainer? And I was with this tension of that, and I said, you know what? I've got to speak up. But there was this uncomfortable feeling of that, consequences of doing that. So I can definitely relate with that a number of times.
And that's where the conversation that you brought up around the mask comes in, because how we've been conditioned to express ourselves or not express ourselves will determine whether or not we speak up about things and how we speak up about things. So there's a lot of conscious awareness that comes with expressing ourselves. And often we can do it as a knee-jerk reaction, which doesn't serve and support anyone. And sometimes people speak up and there's no wisdom in what they're saying. It's just blurting and just yelling and berating. And so in their desire to morally express themselves, they start behaving unethically. So you'll see the trolls starting. You'll see the social media terrorism occurring.
Demonization, labeling. Got it.
So in the lack of wisdom or lack of discernment around the moral expression, they'll actually start to become more dysfunctional in that way. So we've got to bring that healthy level of expression as we do this. So that's two of them. And then the number three is pro-social silence. So pro-social silence is a very interesting one. Pro-social silence is when we don't speak up because we have a loyalty to the institution or the organization or the leaders within the organization. So our silence means that we don't harm a leader or harm somebody else whose behaviors will be called into question if we do speak up. So, you might see, we see this in sporting industries a lot. So when bad behavior from sporting players get hidden. Why? Because they don't want to ruin the reputation of a sporting player. So we'll see settlements occurring rather than things going to court. It'll be hushed. That's when those types of behaviors happen. It's moral silence. So there's still some action that occurs, but it's not the full-fledged justice that people would expect. And then the final one is opportunistic silence. Opportunistic silence is when we just will not speak up because we will gain by staying silent.
Yes. I've certainly seen that one run through my psyche trying to negotiate with me. So yeah, relating to these. I mean, I'm wondering, those on this call, can you relate to some of these? Have you noticed some of these going through you when you're wanting to share, or how is this relating to you? Just want to give you a moment to check in there. And possibly also, I've seen a question here from Jazz. Can you speak to the role of collaboration as a key value of leadership going forward? Now, again, we could unpack more what you mean by collaboration, but I know we've done a lot of work with facilitation, and this is what personally excites me, because I know you're amazing at this, the work that you do in that space. John Maxwell, The 5 Levels of Leadership, it's about developing leaders beyond you. So it's really, that facilitating them to rise up. Perhaps you could speak to that from your experience, your vast experience in helping leaders.
Well, John Maxwell was one of the very first leadership experts that I started studying when I was a very young leader. So when I was about 18 years old, someone gave me one of his books, and I think I started on what was called the Maximum Impact Program. And I'm like, what, 40? I think I'm like 41. I'm 41 now, or I might be 42. I can't remember. So that was a long, long, long time ago. So I'm really familiar with John Maxwell's work. And so, yeah, absolutely. Core values such as collaboration really is one of the critical values in helping leaders and organizations move towards more ethical conversations. However, this is where the clincher really happens, because beautiful values such as collaboration and teamwork and what's some of the other ones? Innovation, and some of those more wholesome values are not the same as morals. And that's where some of these challenges start to occur for people. So when we want to look at how do we help a leader become more moral, become more ethical, and why do I keep banging on about this? Well, it's because it's my research area, so I'm very, very, very invested in this. I spend my days just reading and writing and, studying and researching this. But part of the challenge that we have as a globe, as a world, as an entire in humanity in leadership, it is our ethics in leadership. We are seeing far too many numbers rising around discrimination, around injustices, around sexual harassment, around financial frauds and swindles, around, goodness me, and even all the other dark sides of leadership that is just so abhorrent and extreme that we're seeing in the name of profit, in the name of money.
Yeah.
This is why it's happening. So even if I've walked into many, countless now. I've gone into many organizations as a leadership consultant and worked on people's values. And I sat there, and I've specifically been doing the work on values with leaders for the last, 10 years. And I've kept thinking to myself, why is it, even though we're helping, I'm helping them create more empowered values, are they still doing this dirty stuff? What is going on? Or I'll get phone calls. I'll get phone calls from executives, and it will be borderline whistleblowing to me about unethical stuff that's going on. So what's happening? What's occurring is that we're creating these window dressing values which look great because it sounds good, and it is good. Collaboration is beautiful. These are things that we want people to honor, but with that comes this infusion and an integration of what is the integrity of the word collaboration. Well, one of the aspects of integrity is that we look at respect. Collaboration is about respect. It's about human dignity. It's about allowing someone to have more expression, have the freedom to express themselves, particularly if you think about people who are executives within an organization. Well, you consider yourself a stakeholder. You have a vested interest there. Every single one of us here in this engagement here, right now. We all have a vested interest in here. It's why John is keeping an eye on the comments. I'm doing the best I can, but we give a damn. We want to make sure that everyone has a voice as much as we possibly can in this interview.
Yeah. And just on that, else, you know, with this money being the altar, or whatever it particularly is, for me, what I'm also hearing is there's definite link to deeper levels of intimacy. When I say that intimacy, I don't mean that in a romantic context. I mean that in the demasking context. I mean that in the soul to soul, being to being, and there has to be a value on that, because when there's not a value on that, then there's a value on some form of masking, role play, some type of whether it's the money over the humanity, over the beingness. And I see that time and time again, whether it's in religion. So I studied toxic churches for a while, and the patterns are there. Gurus, you know, even in the spiritual context, these enlightened gurus that are having a degree of the higher realms, and then there's this dysfunctional side because there's a power that comes with that admiration. So this is playing out in so many different fields. I really relate to the question from Michelle about, will this ever end? It is a journey. Would you like to speak on that?
I have
got to have hope.
I definitely do. I really do have hope, because you know, as we said before, there's sometimes people just don't know what they're doing. You know, often we'll confuse you know, the everyday crappy stuff that we see going on. You know, I'm not talking about the extremes, just talking about everyday, you know, blights and slights. You know, sometimes we confuse that for people being evil, when really it's just incompetence.
Yeah.
You know, it's incompetence. Why don't we speak up? Well, is it acquiescence? Is it quiescence? Is it pro-social? Is it opportunistic? There's skills and capabilities that we've actually not been taught. We have missed out on, and someone said it before, you know.
I love this.
We've been conditioned to be acquiescent. Yes, that's true, but we've also been conditioned to be quiescent. Fear speaking up, because if you speak up, for example, in the workplace, what's the fear that most people have? I'm gonna lose my job.
Well, it's that judgment, that shaming, and then it's the fear of being with our emotions.
Yeah. So people fear
another conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So people fear losing the job. There's studies showing that the level of marginalization when people speak up about immoral behavior or unethical behavior is just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. It is just the lack of human dignity that is connected directly to moral expression shows how far we have come from true and pure relationships. And this is why I've dedicated the next at least 10 to 20 years of my life and just looking at, well, how do we best understand moral silence and moral censorship so we can help people understand how to morally express themselves. So yeah, I absolutely do have hope, because when we recognize that we're taught and we're encouraged to morally disengage for one of those 4 reasons that we spoke about, and yes, there's probably more as well, then we can say to ourselves, okay, well, is that just a matter of me learning how to, as you said, be okay with speaking up and being okay with my emotions in doing so, being okay with the feeling of anxiety or stress or fear? What do I need to do to be able to speak up about something? Do I need to speak with someone else about it? There's a lot of research that's been done on the power of scripting and the power of role play before you speak up about something important. So there is, I have hope. I definitely do have hope. Will we ever get there? I absolutely believe we do. I think that there's, you know, John, you were saying earlier, I don't know if it was in the interview or just before we were talking about it, about the levels of, you know, the awakening and people just starting to become more conscious and become more heart-centered. And that truly is where everything we do is heart-centered, leadership as well. And we've moved so far away from that. And there's a lot of different elements to it, particularly issues around complexities in organizations, the stresses that leaders have to ensure that they're making high levels of profit for shareholders, the power imbalances that occur. Do morals come into business at all is still a big question that's out there. Most of the academic community and the business community typically we don't teach ethics in the space of business. When we look at undergraduates going into business studies, or people doing MBAs and so forth, conversations around ethics and how to deal with ethical issues is pretty light on. So we're actually conditioning people to glorify power, glorify money, glorify claiming and attaining more and more and more resources.
Got it. Yeah. It's a lot there. And just checking in if you can hear me okay. I think we've had a...
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Screen froze. Beautiful. And we've got some questions. Doesn't this all start with the parenting and the schooling systems from Lucy? It starts and ends with you from Michelle, which is back to the responsibility theme. Let's go ignite some more hope into this narrative, because there's a lot there of the dark side we've been looking at. How do we move this dial even more up? I know whether this is a coincidence or not, but I know the search term spiritual awakening has started spiking in Google Trends from 2009 up consistently. There seems to be a shift in consciousness. I know a lot of our audience believe that. When that's happening, there's this awareness of transparency where the BS can't hide, the shadow can't hide, and we get to become more conscious. Let's speak to the hope of this transforming. How do you see this moving and shifting, continuing to?
I see people supporting each other a lot more when they come face to face with slights that they see occurring. I see people conversing with each other more and seeking out more wisdom about what things are, how things are, bringing more independent thinking as well into what is actually occurring for them and how do they want to operate, how do they want to be. We all always have freedom to speak and free will. 100%. That's something that doesn't ever get taken away from us. We always can make a decision to speak up and express ourselves, or we can choose to stay silent. Now, yes, sometimes it does, sometimes and quite often it comes with a lot of repercussions, but it doesn't mean it's not an option that's on the table for people. So what does that look like? Well, yeah, we spoke about responsibility before, but it's so much more than that. It's, you know, having the courage to speak up about what you believe to be important. It's about having about delving into our sense of being more vulnerable in how we want to behave and how we want to relate to people. It's about taking a good hard look at ourselves and asking the big questions that what do I want my world to look like? What do I want my experiences to be like? How do I want to relate to people that I'm coming into contact with every single day? My parents, my children, my co-staff members, my managers, my leaders, whatever it might be. You get to make the decision about how to be. And
I just want to speak to that, Elsa, 1 second. Because what I love about you and my experience of knowing you for the past years is you come across, whenever I meet you and I see the way you greet other leaders and coaches, there's this presence of delight in the person you're seeing that you always bring. There's a genuine presence before the conversation, before everything happens, you bring that. And I think that to me is true leadership, because it's that acknowledgement of the individual, that child in front of you, that student, that colleague. And it's that moment to look them in the eyes and say hi. And just have that connection, and then get on with the things. I think that is a very simple and powerful thing that I've seen you demonstrate so well.
Yeah.
Just wanted to interject.
No, thank you. No, I think that's a great point, and I think as we start to become more conscious of our ability to create the world in which we experience, people will stop living on automatic pilot and being too busy to take notice, or being too distracted to be there and just be present with someone and look them in the eye, and be less focused on the stuff going on for them, and recognize that when they're with another individual, to honor the humanity in someone, to see someone's dignity, to see that individual. And that's why I say I have hope. I see more and more and more of it occurring. You know, this has been such a beautiful experience for some people who have had the opportunity to reflect. And when I say this has been, I mean this pandemic. There's a lot of people who I've been speaking with who is just appalled at what has occurred. But at the same time, they've taken stock and asked themselves, how do I want things to be? The decision is always ours. We have to remember that we get to make our mind up about why we're here on earth. And that's one of the beautiful delusions that I love to live in. I like to believe that I'm here for a reason, and that everything that I notice and that I'm aware of, and everything that really concerns me that I see, I like to look for the patterns in that. I like to look, and I like to remember that, you know, my family came from South Africa. My parents grew up in the apartheid era, and they came here to Australia. I like to remember the struggles that they would have had to experience, the civil liberties that were taken away from them. I like to remember that because of that, a lot of my family went into politics and they fought for the injustices. They fought for people who couldn't speak up for themselves. And I like to remember that as I go about my day as a mother, as a researcher, as a friend, and so forth, I like to remember that these are all these aspects that comprise the way in which I've been conditioned to notice liberty's been taken away from people, notice dignity's been taken away from people. And I just hope that for me, this is going to help me live out my meaning and what I believe to be my purpose here on earth. And I think this can be the same for so many people. We choose to believe that we're here for a reason, and that we are good, and that we want to create good, and that we can do that.
Well, I love that delusion. I'll take that any day. And I know Viktor Frankl and different people in very hard situations have embraced that delusion and have used it effectively. We're coming to the end of the hour. I want to ask you a final question. Before we do, I just want to read this out from Jazz. Intimacy for me is the lack of walls and masks of other and separation between people, which I feel is shifting. We have to care beyond ourselves, our spheres, that is all inclusive of all. Love that. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So my final question as we come to an end here is, what question around leadership have you not been asked before that you would like to be asked?
Oh, wow, John. That's a big one. This is one I've never been asked. How do I really help my team be empowered?
Okay. So how do we do that? How do we do
that? Well, I think we've covered a bit of it this evening, but my response my response is to see the dignity in your people, to see their humanity. You can't see that, and if you don't assume the integrity of leadership office, which is to see the dignity in people who are citizens of the space in which you occupy, then no how is ever gonna land. You could bring the most sophisticated team development strategies. You could bring the most phenomenal and advanced how to bring out the best of your team programs. But if the leader does not see the dignity and the humanity in those in which they are guardians of, it will never, ever fly. It'll never happen. They have to see the dignity and humanity first.
I'm feeling that in my physiology. Thank you. That's beautiful. If people want to connect with you, if they've dug this conversation and they resonate with your message and your style and what you've just shared, how can they get hold of you? How can they find you?
I'm on Facebook, so I think that's probably the easiest one. that they could connect with me on. So it would be on Facebook, and happy to further the conversation and share some insights, or just have them part of the community. Absolutely.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Ilse. Thank you for everyone on this call. Thank you for your presence, for your comments, for your interactions. If you're not yet in our database, you can head over to reclaimyourlives.com, where we keep up to date with different updates and what's happening with the World Health Sovereignty Summit and all that news. So please head over there. You can certainly keep the conversation going with Ilse and find her on Facebook. And once again, thank you, everyone. Ilse, a delight and a privilege to rock out with you and have this chat.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come and share. And yeah, absolutely. The comments were extraordinary this evening. If this is what the comments are like here, man, this is a good place to be. Really, really great. Thank you everyone for having me. Much appreciated.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao.